Hi, friends. My name is Pat Cooney. I'm a musician, bass player here in Ottawa, Canada. I'm currently playing with two bands. One is a 80s new wave tribute act called The Underground. The other is an original rock and roll band, country rock, blues rock, folk rock, and we're called The Whiskey Ghost. I've been asked today to talk to you about 6 albums that fall into different categories that I love. And this is always a really hard ask for me because I just love so many different records and so many different bands and so many different genres of music. So I struggled to really put this list together, but this is what I got for you, and I hope you enjoy. So first up is my go-to album. Now that's really hard to ask me what my go-to album is because that's really going to be dependent on what my mood is and what I'm looking for at the time. But thinking about it, if I was being really honest with myself, there's 2 albums, so I'm cheating. There's 2 albums that I'm constantly, regularly pulling out of my collection to put on. And that is this album here, Winwood, Steve Winwood. It's a best of compilation album that was put out in 1971. And it covers music that he released when he was with Spencer Davis Group, when he was with Blind Faith, with Powerhouse, and with Traffic. Interesting thing about this album is that when it was first released, it was done so without Steve's permission, without his authorization, and he ended up, putting out a lawsuit. He and his record company put out a lawsuit, and they got the album taken off the shelves, and it was re-released a little bit later. With his authorization, they changed up a couple of the tracks, and this version here, this is the re-release version. And yeah, I'm constantly putting this record on. The other one falls into pretty much the same kind of category, is Anthology, Steve Miller Band. This is also a compilation, a best of. It covers the first 7 albums by the Steve Miller Band. And it's before the Steve Miller Band really got their big commercial success in the mid to late 70s. It covers the first 7 albums, and it really focuses on the Steve Miller Band's, psychedelic, spacey, folky blues rock stuff that they were doing at the time. Both of those albums, I'm just, ever since I bought them in high school, I've been putting them on regularly. As soon as the needle hits the groove, I'm singing along, I'm having a great time. So I got to say, those are definitely go-to albums for me. Now, next up would be an album that stands the test of time. And for that one, I'm going to go with Remain in Light by Talking Heads. This album is incredible. It's released in 1980. It's Talking Heads at, I guess, arguably their most experimental. They're pulling in influences from Afrobeat, from funk, from rap, from disco, as well as their art rock and punk rock, beginnings. And one of the reasons why I say this album stands the test of time is that I can hear this album in contemporary music that's coming out today. I look at bands like LCD Sound System or Hot Chip, and some of those tracks that those bands are putting out sound like they could be outtakes from this album specifically. And, what else is going to define an album that stands the test of time as something where you're still hearing that album in the influences of musicians, 45, 50 years later. So that's my album that stands the test of time. For the next one up was Sunday Morning. What's an album I put on a Sunday morning? Now, I interpreted that to mean, what's a more relaxing, chill kind of album that you want to put on, assuming you had a big Friday night out, Sunday morning, you're kind of taking it slow, getting into the groove of the day and stuff like that. And under those circumstances, an album that I would go to for that would be something like A Tribe Called Quest's People, Instinctive Travels, and Paths of Rhythm. This is the debut album by A Tribe Called Quest, released in 1990. And it's just got this lovely, laid back groove to the whole thing. I mean, not every song is laid back or chill, but nothing really gets too aggressive. So for a Sunday morning, you're just getting into the day, this is a great album, especially if you're an old school, hip hop head like I am. Definitely a favorite record of mine. Now, next up would be what was the first album I ever bought. So this is fun. I love telling people about the first album I ever bought. First album I ever bought with my very own money, Dynasty by Kiss, released in 1979. I can't remember if I got this in 1979 or 1980. It would have been around that point in time. I do remember being in Sam the Record Man and seeing it there with all the other, albums. And it was the cover, I think, that really drew me to it. I didn't know who Kiss was back then. I was too young to really know who Kiss was. But that album cover with the makeup and that whole bit, it attracted me. I bought the album, I took it home, and I loved it. It was a good album, a lot of fun. And the thing that's really interesting to me, thinking about this now, is, I became a Kiss fan after getting this record. And one of the things I loved about that band was their pageantry, the whole kabuki theater element to what they were doing with the makeup and the special effects and the fire and the spitting blood and the whole bit. So much fun. And I think about the bands that I love going to see live today. And they're all bands that want to put in a little bit of something extra, a little bit of something special into those live shows and make them unique, and not just, 3 or 4 or 5 people up on stage playing the songs, but, doing something to give it a little bit of a show. And that's got to come from my roots of, picking up this album in the late 70s, early 80s, whenever it is that I got it, and becoming a big Kiss fan and loving all that pageantry that came with a live Kiss show. So next up would be, what would be an album that I think more people should hear? And again, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to give you 2. First up, historic performances at the Monterey Pop Festival. And this is 2 artists on this. This is Otis Redding and the Jimi Hendrix Experience. This is released in 1970, 3 years after the historic Monterey Pop Festival. And the reason why I'm saying more people need to hear this album is this was a very historic concert for both the Jimi Hendrix Experience and Otis Redding. For the Jimi Hendrix Experience, though they were very popular in the UK at the time, they weren't really known in the United States. And it was their performance at Monterey Pop that really broke them into the mainstream in the United States and kicked off their career in North America. For Otis Redding, he had not really performed for mainstream white audiences up until the Monterey Pop Festival. And that was his breakthrough with the mainstream white audience to get his sound out there. You read the accounts, and both of those performances just blew everybody away. It was also the iconic night that Jimmy, when he was playing Wild Thing, lit his guitar on fire and smashed it on stage and threw it out into the audience. And I think really, started that legend of Jimmy as the big guitar destroyer, monster guitar god. So historically, this is I think a very important album. Both of the performances, this is not the full performances that made it onto this. The full performances are available on albums that were released since this one. But from a historic point of view, this is a pretty cool album to have. And the performances are definitely worth checking out. So get this album or get the full performances that have now been released. It's super cool. Now, I'm cheating again, so here's the second one that I think more people should hear. That's Street Nicks by the Shuffle Demons. The Shuffle Demons, very important band to me. This was released in 1986. They're a jazz band from Toronto, and they're the reason why I play saxophone. And I said I was a bass player at the beginning, but I started my career as a musician as a saxophone player. And it's because of the Shuffle Demons. It's because of this album. I first heard the single Spadina Bus that was on this album. And I was 12 years old. And the video came on TV. And I remember pointing at the TV. Essentially, it's like, that's what I want to do with my life. And yeah, and another band that is known for these big stage shows that they do, where they would get off stage playing their saxophones and parade through the audience and do this whole bit and stuff like that. Not just standing on stage playing the songs, but really making sure that they were providing a fun concert going experience for everybody. So that Kiss thing going through. So yeah, definitely Shuffle Demon Street Nicks album that I think more people should hear. I love that band. I love those guys. And last up is, what is the last album that I purchased? So the last album that I bought is this one here. It's the debut album by Just Ice called Back to the Old School. It was released in 1986, but this is actually the Record Store Day release from 2021 for the 35th anniversary. And they actually only printed 1,000 copies of this, so I feel pretty special that I got to have this. And I bought this. It was actually sitting in a discount bin at a record store in New York City. I was there this past fall, and it was there marked down like 25%, and I couldn't just let it sit there. This is an awesome record, especially if you're an old hip hop head like me. This is one of the first real hardcore East Coast hip hop albums, and the production on this from Mantronix really just, it doesn't, it sounds like it's 1986, but it doesn't sound dated at the same time, if that makes any sense. It's just a great record, and I had to pick it up. So there you go. There's my 6, but actually 8 records, because I cheated on 2 of them, and I hope you enjoyed.